Paradoxically, somebody who has a strong quant background from school, it's not going to work on this test. You actually have to study differently.
So how does one unlearn 12 years of education?
One of the biggest mistakes that people make is not giving themselves enough time.
Are you familiar with something called Mozart Makes You Smarter? Certain tracks from Mozart that if you played them, they would improve your test score.
What you're really doing ultimately is not just learning stuff, but practicing recalling it.
That you walk in, there's a proctor there, and it's the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
A little bit of nervousness is a good thing because it is going to give you adrenaline, and that adrenaline is going to help you focus.
Welcome to another episode of the mbaMission podcast. We've got an awesome episode today. We've got a tremendous guest. We're talking GMAT. Let's get to it quickly. So many applicants leap into GMAT prep by quickly reviewing some basic test-taking principles before drilling math questions. Few take the time to really think about how they can set themselves up for success. How often should you study? When should you study? Should you study right until the very last minute? What time of day might you take the test? We're going to delve into all these questions today and more, and we're fortunate to have not just a teacher extraordinaire with us, but really, maybe she wouldn't say this of herself because she's modest, but a test prep guru who considers these issues thoughtfully and carefully, who truly thinks about student performance at all levels. Stacey Koprince is a 20-year veteran GMAT, GRE, and EA instructor. She's truly one of the most sought-after instructors in the industry because as the leader of Manhattan Prep's content and curriculum team, she absolutely is steeped in content like no one else. She's literally writing the books and lessons on test prep. Welcome, Stacey Koprince.
I'm excited to be here.
I want to show people how good you are at this. So I want to show people how you can break things down quickly.
All right.
And let me just give you a scenario here for a second. Let's say we've got an engineering applicant. This individual just was at the top of his engineering class, very strong analytically. This person is rocking the verbal section, doing quite well in the DI section, and is struggling with the quant.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. We're not expecting that. What is going on with that applicant? Can you tell me without having any more information?
I can.
Or you can tease it out of me,
I can actually, because I see this all the time. So people who have done really well in math classes in school and quantitative-based academic situations, what they'll do is they'll do what worked for them in school to study for the GMAT, which is not what's going to work for the GMAT. So in school, when we were learning math, think back to how the chapters worked. So you had these questions where it was like, okay, here's a question. Then here's 5 more versions of that question, but just with different numbers. And there are 6 steps to answer that kind of question. So memorize the 6 steps. And then you have that with a few different questions. And then you get a test that has basically those exact same questions again, but with different numbers. And you're just spitting back the steps that you memorized to learn how to solve those questions. That's how math in school works. That's not how the GMAT works. The questions that you see on the GMAT, you're never going to see the exact same questions that you studied, but just with different numbers or with a couple of different details. The GMAT's actually tested. The name of the math section is not math or quant, it's quantitative reasoning. What they're actually testing us on is how we logically think about quantitative concepts. And so the questions that you see, parts of them are going to resemble questions that you studied. They're going to ping things and say, oh, I saw something that was partially like that, but it also had this partial thing over here and maybe this third thing over here. And you're going to have to integrate all of that, that knowledge that you learned before you got to that question on the test to figure out how to reason your way through it in the moment. And that's a very different way to study than just, oh, here's a question. It has 6 steps, memorize them, and you're going to see this exact question, but with different numbers on the test. So paradoxically, somebody who has a strong quant background from school, if they're trying to use what worked for them in school, it's reasonable to think, oh, I'm going to do this again for this test. But it's not going to work on this test. You actually have to study differently. Now, the cool part of that is the way that you get ready to tackle quant stuff on the GMAT or the GRE or the EA, that kind of thinking your way through logically, thinking quantitatively, reasoning about quant concepts, that is going to help you in business school because that's what business school quant classes are going to be like. It's not just here, spit back some numbers, spit back some steps.
Stacey, I fully understand what's going on here. But at the same point, you have somebody who's learned how to study in a particular way for the last dozen years or so.
Completely.
And then you have the GMAT coming, maybe it's weeks away, maybe it's months away, but not much more than that. So how does one unlearn 12 years of education
Yeah, so with a lot of work. So getting ready for these exams is an endeavor. It's a decent amount of time. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is not giving themselves enough time to really adequately prepare for these exams. The way that I would encourage you to view it is not just that you're getting ready to take this test, but that you're actually getting yourself ready to excel in grad school, because a lot of what you're going to do to get ready to take the exam is also a mindset shift that you're going to need for grad school itself. Classes don't work the same way in grad school as they did in undergrad or in high school. It's a lot looser. It's a lot more discussion based. It's a lot more thinking on your feet in the classroom. A lot more executive reasoning skills coming into play in the conversations that you're having in class. And so you can make your GMAT or GRE or EA studies do double duty in getting yourself ready to do a great job in the classroom as well as on the exam.
And how much time do you suggest people, again, blank slate here,
Yeah.
I come to you and I say, I want to do great on the GMAT. How much time should I spend on it?
Yeah, so great question. If you're starting from the beginning and you're looking for a good score, a competitive score that's going to get you into one of those top 10 or top 20 schools, generally speaking, you're looking at spending probably 12 to 15 hours a week over a period of about 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
But really, I would say call it 5 months, because things are going to interrupt you periodically during that 3 to 4 months. You're going to go on vacation one week. Work is going to get really busy one week. You're going to get sick, whatever it might be. So you're going to have a few weeks where you're not studying at all, or you're just not operating at peak performance. So over a period of 4 to 5 months, most weeks, you're studying 10 to 15 hours a week. 12 to 15 hours a week, something like that.
Okay. That would include taking a class, and that would include
If you're
what you do on your own.
If you're taking a class, yes. So the homework, the practice tests, taking the class, all in. Mm-hmm.
What's a common mistake that people make in their prep? I don't mean like academic mistake. I mean in terms of organizing their study habits and study schedule. And it's something you could even diagnose from afar.
So there's so many things I want to talk about. Okay, let's go back to the quant thing. A lot of people come into studying for this exam not having taken a quant class or a math class in a long time.
Okay.
For some people, they haven't taken math since high school. For some people, it's been since university, but maybe they're a few years out now, so it's been a while. And if you're not using this stuff every day, you've forgotten a lot of it. Who remembers how to find a common denominator?
Right.
I mean, I do because I teach it. But other than that, if you're not
I'll have
using
to think
this,
about that a little bit. Yeah.
Right. If you're not using it, why would your brain remember that information or be able to recall that information? And so a lot of people try to dive straight into the hardest material.
Right.
And it's really important to make sure that you're laying a good foundation for yourself before you get. Yes, of course, eventually you want to get to the harder stuff, because the GMAT is adaptive. The GRE is adaptive. The EA is adaptive. They're adaptive in different ways, but they're all adaptive. And so basically, if you can earn a harder score, you are going to get harder questions on the test. So that's why people immediately want to go to the hard stuff. But you can't get to those hard questions unless you have a really solid foundation, because if you make mistakes on some of the easier stuff, it's going to pull you back, and you literally won't get to the hard questions at all.
Okay, and that will obviously top out your score.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Let's go back to the study plan itself. Like, do you think there would be a significant difference if I studied before work or after work, or on the weekend versus on the weekday?
Okay, so the single biggest thing that you want to do is you want to study most days of the week. So really think of this as like an exercise program. You can't wait until Saturday and then exercise for 8 hours and then do nothing for the rest of the week and expect to get anywhere. You're just going to atrophy for the rest of the week and then die on Saturday when you try to study, right? So it's the same thing with exercising your brain. So most days of the week, definitely take at least one day a week off. Again, with an exercise program, you got to have a break day, right? But 5, sometimes 6 days a week. On some days, you might only study for a half an hour total, and that might be broken down into 3 blocks of 10 minutes between meetings or sitting on the subway or whatever and looking at flashcards. And on some days, you're going to have more intense study where you're in there for 2 hours, 3 hours. Maybe you're taking a practice test that day. But it's really a little bit every day. And what you're doing there, the reason you're doing that, first of all, is simply because our brains can only learn so much new information in a single day. And second of all, what you're really doing ultimately is not just learning stuff, but practicing recalling it. Because during the exam, you're not learning anything. During the exam, you're recalling information. And so you need to have a lot of opportunities to practice with this huge volume of information that you're putting into your brain. How do I recall what I need when I need it quickly? Because all of these exams are timed. What do I need right in this moment?
Right. You know what? Let's pause here, actually. I think we jumped over this notion that there's different parts of the exam. So maybe, can you just take us through the GMAT, what the different parts are, what are they supposed to be testing? And I suspect there's different ways of preparing for
And the
each part.
GRE as well, I suppose. Yeah.
Right, and the GRE as well.
Yeah, so on the GMAT and the EA, so the GMAT and the EA are made by the same organization, and the two exams are fairly similar. So there's 3 sections on both of those exams. There's a math section, quantitative reasoning section. There's a data insights section, which is data analytics. It's a mix of quant and verbal skills, and it's very real world. A lot of the questions feel like case studies that you'll see in business school. You've got graphs or tables of information plus text that you're trying to process to answer questions. And then there's a verbal reasoning section that has sort of the classic reading comprehension and those kinds of things. So that's on the GMAT and the EA. And then on the GRE side, you've got quant, verbal, and an essay.
So going back to something you triggered something. I had a tumultuous GMAT experience. Right. I'm not the analytical thinker that you are. I'm an artist.
Right.
I mean, I know you're an artist as well.
Yeah.
I remember I really plateaued at a very low level. It took me a long time to inch up, and I finally did just fine on it. But I was basically the equivalent of like thrashing around like annoyed in my small Washington D.C. apartment, just like, why am I doing so badly on this? Like, what's wrong with me?
Like you're putting in all this work, but it's not getting you anywhere.
Hyper emotional, upset, like frustrated. I never go to business school, and I was a strong like high school math student, and so like I was thinking like, how do you know when you've had it for the day? Like something as simple as that. I have studied, and maybe I was just like, I studied too long, was just like getting to the point where I was making sloppy errors. I don't know. How does one know?
So, and in this, you're talking about in a particular day, I should stop studying or I should take a break right now.
Yeah, like, are there certain stop studying at this point?
So yes. So first of all, if you find yourself, making a ton of careless mistakes and you keep making those careless mistakes, if you find yourself, your mind's wandering, we've all had this experience where you read a sentence and then you're like, wait, what did I just read? And you read the sentence again. And then you're like, wait, what did I just read? And you have to keep rereading the sentence. Right. Your brain's just not functioning at that point, or it's not functioning for this anyway. Right. The thing that I'll try next is not to stop studying, but to just switch completely the topic that I'm studying. If I'm doing math, I'm going to switch to verbal. If I'm doing something verbal focused, I'm going to switch to math, but just do something else. Right. The other thing I tell people is in any given study session, your first thing is something that you find harder. Your brain's at its freshest right now. Right. So start with whatever you want to do that day that's the most challenging. And as you start to get more fatigued, go for something that's easier for you so that you can push it a little bit longer. Yeah. But when you find that even that's not working, you're rereading and it's just not coming in, or you're making a ton of mistakes and it's just not getting any better. Okay, fine. Stand up, go walk around, do a little physical activity. Go grab something to eat. Go walk around the block, something like that. Right. Don't doom scroll on your phone because then you'll just keep doing that. So give yourself a little bit of a break. Set a timer for 20, 30 minutes.
You know, it's funny. I think about that feedback, and like I often say to applicants, like we ideally would prefer that an applicant take the test, have a test in hand, and then start working on their applications, just because it gives them the peace of mind to apply with confidence. Right. But if they're doing both of them together because they have to, as some applicants do, I'm like, this could be this is okay. It could be a good break. You can't study the GMAT all the time. You know, throw in a little bit of preparing your resume.
That's great one. Go do something else. Go, or even just go wash the dishes or do something around the house. Then go do your laundry. Do something. So take a little break, and come back and try one more time.
No, that makes sense. Jeremy, I thought you were going to ask a slightly different question, which is, how about you have an applicant who has taken the GMAT or GRE 2, 3, 4 times and is getting the exact same score. Then they go away, they study like the world is coming to an end. They keep on studying, and then they get the exact same score. I mean, I had that literally yesterday as someone had taken it for the 4th time, exact same score. I mean, what do you even say to somebody like that? Yeah,
so in that case, it's possible that the person has hit their peak score. We all have peak scores that we're not going to get beyond, or maybe we'd get another 10 points or something, but at 10 points GMAT or 1 point on GRE. So that's a possibility. Yeah. One thing, if the person's, they're doing this because they still want a higher score than the score that they have right now. There are a couple of things to look at that point. And so one is just to go and talk to somebody like me and say, hey, here are my practice test results. Here's the data from the practice tests. Can you see anything in here that's going on? Try to diagnose what might be going on with this person. A lot of times what I'll see, for example, is that people are making suboptimal timing decisions, like time management decisions during the test. And that is going to eat away at your score. You can pick up often another, again, 20, 30 points if you're talking GMAT, or a couple of points, a few points on the GRE, through making better decisions about where to spend your time and really where not to spend your time is the key there.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that can be part of it. Another part of it can be maybe this test isn't the best test for you. Maybe you should switch tests.
Right. That makes sense. So let's talk about that a little bit more. We start off by talking about 3 different tests here, the GMAT, GRE, and the EA. How do I know which one is right for me?
Yeah, great question. So let's start with the GMAT and the GRE. So those 2 exams are typically accepted by almost all business schools. So you obviously, for any school that you're interested, go look at their website to find out what they'll accept. But chances are the schools will accept both the GMAT and the GRE. There are a smaller number of schools that accept the EA. That exam was started for executive MBA programs. It is used at a number of regular MBA programs now. So again, check the websites of your schools. I am a big fan of the EA for multiple reasons. If your target schools all take it. But that's more limited.
Right. And just parenthetically, we're only talking about a half a dozen schools that actually take the EA for the 2-year program.
Yeah. I mean, at least among the top programs.
For top programs, for top full-time programs. There are more programs that do the evening and more evening and weekend programs that take
Columbia, NYU, Duke, Darden might be it.
I think that's right.
Might be one other.
Yeah.
And that'll change. So for anyone listening to that could change with time. So don't take our word for it because this is
as always
this is as of a moment in time.
Let's say that the choice is between the GMAT and the GRE, really, because those are the 2 programs, or the 2 exams, that you're pretty much guaranteed programs are going to accept. Between the 2, the GRE has a reputation for being easier, particularly.
The GRE does.
The GRE does, particularly on the math. I wouldn't say, especially with the change now, with the new version of the GMAT, I wouldn't say it's easier on the verbal because you still have to do vocab. On the GRE, where grammar is no longer on the GMAT. So that kind of changes things on the verbal side. But on the math side, the GRE has a reputation for being easier. Easier is a weird word.
What does easier really mean?
I know.
Because does this just mean that it would calibrate to I know they don't really calibrate.
Yeah.
But,
so there's 2 things to think about when you hear somebody say, well, the GRE math is easier. One is easier depends on your strengths and weaknesses in the particular math. There are certain things that are more commonly tested on one exam versus the other. So yes, it might be the case that one of those exams is a little bit better for you than the other in terms of your math strengths and weaknesses. The other thing I'll say, though, is for any test, if any test is easier, well, okay, but it's easier for everybody then, not just for you.
Right. That's a good point, actually. That is a very good point.
And what does easier mean? It means you would get an 80th percentile on the quant on the GMAT and get like an 87th on the GRE. And doesn't the admissions committee just understand that there's some sort of relative
and they do.
Yeah.
Right.
I've had clients who I looked at them and I said, oh, this person's right for the GMAT, this person's right for the GRE, more engineering type for GMAT, attorney for the GRE. I've been completely wrong. The reality is
Harold humble as always.
Yeah,
always.
The reality is you got to go test them out.
You got to try them out. Yeah. So you never know. With the conversation we were having earlier around sometimes you'll get the math students, the engineering folks, whatever, and they're not doing well on the math on these exams because they're trying to do it the school math way, and the school math way won't let you maximize your score on the test.
When is the right time to start taking tests? When do you actually feel like you are nearing how do you tell if you're near your peak?
Yeah.
And is there such thing as too much studying? Yeah. Can you overdo it?
I mean, of course, you can burn out on anything. So yes, absolutely. So first of all, when do you study? And you're talking more globally, when in my life, when in my career kind of thing.
No, I mean more like if I've studied for 3 months and I'm like, I think I'm doing well enough to take a test now. How do I know when I'm doing well enough?
Well, so first of all, you're taking practice tests. So first of all, you're taking practice tests throughout. And here's another thing that a lot of people don't do that you really should do is you take a practice test almost immediately. Your first practice test that we in our classes, you take your first practice test before the first class session. There's a bare amount of homework that's here are these question types. Here's how the timing works. Go take a practice test. So your data rules the world, right? So you're taking these practice tests as you're going through your studies to see what your performance is like, to see how it's changing, to see what your strengths and weaknesses are, so that you can use that data to help inform your studies to help prioritize. And so as you're going through, and as you're getting later in your studies, early on, you're not taking practice tests as close together. You're really more in like download mode and learning a bunch of things, content and question types and everything else. As you get later in your studies, you're going into more cyclical, do a practice test, review it, figure out the low-hanging fruit there that you can go after before your next practice test to try to lift your score. In an ideal world, so let's say you're taking the exam, you're trying to get the exam out of the way a year ahead of when you're applying, so you're not worried about a deadline that you're trying to hit. So in an ideal world, you're basically going through these cycles until your practice test scores get into the range of what you'd like to score on the real test. Of course, within reason, if you want to get a perfect score on the test, you're going to be probably studying a very long time. I've been doing this 20 years. I haven't gotten a perfect score on the GMAT. I have on the GRE, but not on the GMAT.
There we go.
I've gotten pretty close, but not yet on the GMAT. And so you're ideally, in an ideal world, you're seeing it in your practice test scores, and so then you're ready to go in and take it. Now, if you're working with a deadline, or if you're in a situation where you keep trying to get to your target score and you're not quite getting there, okay, you know what? Maybe you go in and you take the real test, get that experience, understand what the test is like, lock down a score.
Right.
Yeah.
For all of these exams, you can take the exams multiple times. You don't have to share all of your scores with the schools. So you can choose, I really didn't like my first test score, but my second test, that one was good. So that's the one that I'll send to the schools. So it doesn't, the only cost is the literal cost of taking the exam in your own time. That's it.
And there used to be a lifetime limit on GMAT, and that's no longer the case.
They just got rid of it. Yeah. So no lifetime limit.
So you have your entire life to take the GMAT. Good or bad, I'm not sure. Stacey, how about just some basics around the day of the test and actually taking the test as far as strategies, first, last?
Yep. I'm going to start the day before.
Okay.
The day before, what you're not going to do is study for 8 hours, or even 6 or even 4, frankly. Right. Decision fatigue is a real thing. Yeah. You do not want to run a practice marathon the day before you run the real marathon.
Right.
The mental load is no different. The exams are shorter now. So that's nice, but it's still a real mental load to take these tests. So the day before, what you're doing is you're doing 2 things. One is just a high-level reminder to yourself of various strategies, question types, facts, rules, theories, etc. A couple hours at the most. Yep. And then you're getting ready for the next day. You're making sure that you have your ID, the appropriate ID for whichever country you're taking the test in, that you've got whatever snacks you want to bring with you if you were going and taking it at the testing center. If you're going to take it at home, that you're setting up the room in which you're going to take it so that it conforms to the security requirements, all of that kind of stuff. So you're just getting yourself ready the day before. And that night, do something that will half help to distract you from the fact that you're taking the test tomorrow. You're still going to be thinking about the fact that you're taking the test tomorrow. Right. But this is the night to binge watch your favorite TV show, or to go out to dinner at your favorite restaurant, or do something new, do something that you know that you like. Right. Hang out with a friend who makes you laugh, not with the person who stresses you out, that kind of stuff.
That's right.
And then I'm going to go back a little bit further in time. That whole week, go to bed at the time that you want to go to bed the night you take the test, the night before you take the test, and get up in the morning at the time that you need to get up on test day.
That makes
so
sense.
That the night before the test, when you inevitably have trouble falling asleep, or you inevitably wake up in the middle of the night, or you're going to have trouble sleeping, probably a lot of people do the night before. That's okay, as long as you've been getting good sleep the whole week before. So you're fine. Doesn't matter if you get poor sleep the night before. You're going to be fine. Your adrenaline will carry you through.
That makes sense.
Now test day comes.
Yeah.
Are you taking it in the morning? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. You asked me this question, but we didn't get to it. Do you take it in the morning? Do you take it in the evening? Do you take it in the afternoon? You can actually take the exam pretty much any time of day or night now, particularly if you're taking it online. It is important to think about when your brain is most awake and aware. For me personally, if I took the exam, any of these exams at 8 o'clock in the morning, my score would drop by at least 20 percentile points. I'm not a morning person. I absolutely take it in the afternoon or the evening because that's when I can perform at my best. Right. So know that about yourself and time that, basically. And then what you're doing then is just having your routine, like know what you want to do for whatever that length of time is that day before you need to go take your test. Have things set up. If you need to go to a testing center, get into the area a half an hour early just to make sure that There's not a traffic jam or the subway doesn't break down or whatever it may be that you get there. And one thing that I recommend doing is about a half an hour to an hour before your exam starts, do a couple of super easy questions.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have anticipated.
Easy questions, easy ones.
Right.
This is like stretching before the big race.
Right.
You don't want to injure yourself. You don't want to demoralize yourself. So you're not trying hard questions. You're doing easy questions and you're not looking at the answers. I don't care whether you get them right or wrong.
Right.
Again,
Right.
you're jogging around the track, you're stretching, you're just getting ready to get yourself in there.
That makes sense.
To take the test.
Are you familiar with something called Mozart Makes You Smarter? Does anyone remember this, Jeremy? When you took your test, do you remember it?
You play the music while you're studying?
There was specifically certain tracks from Mozart that if you played them, they would improve your test score.
While you were taking it? Or
when you had a break.
Studying? Oh, okay.
Beforehand, while you had a break. And I did that. And I actually am one of those few people who did better on their test than they ever did on their practice test.
Wow.
You just raised something as well. Like, do you have any feeling about whether someone would be better off at home versus a test center?
That's a great question. Okay, so it depends. So it obviously depends on the person. Here are the factors to consider.
Okay.
Generally speaking, when you're taking an exam like this, we're all nervous. You're going to be nervous. A little bit of nervousness is a good thing because it is going to give you adrenaline, and that adrenaline is going to help you focus. Too much nervousness is going to distract you and might derail you and might hurt your score. Right. So you want to find that sweet spot of like enough adrenaline to keep you going, but not so much that it actually hurts you when you're taking the test. Right. And so what I found, generally speaking, and again, this is going to be to each individual, but generally speaking, people are more nervous in the testing center because the environment is not their environment than they are at home. And so
Which
then
could be a good thing.
Well, so it depends.
It depends how nervous you are.
It depends on how nervous you are. So as I'll use myself as an example, I've been doing this for years. I like these tests. If I take it at home, I'm actually going to be too relaxed. I'm not going to perform as well if I take it at home because I'm sitting in my family, I'm sitting in my environment. Right. I have to go to the testing center to perform best because the testing center and the weirdness of the environment will give me that little bit of an extra edge without pushing me too far.
Right. But Harold, what do you think? You think you're a testing center guy? You think you're an at-home guy?
I'm a testing center guy.
Me too.
Honestly, I like that moment. There's almost ceremonial. I mean that quite seriously. That you walk in, there's a proctor there. It's like just really.
It's like the race is going to begin.
Exactly. It's the end. It's the Super Bowl at that point.
I love that they offer the exams at home now. Obviously, that came about because of the pandemic, but this option is fantastic for the many, many, many people who get really nervous with these exams. And so being able to take it in your own environment that you can control helps to manage some of those nerves so that it doesn't get too much.
Right.
So the individual with test anxiety.
That was going to be my question. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, you're saying generally, not in all cases, generally you're probably better off at home.
Most likely. It's most likely the case that somebody who's experiencing more significant test anxiety, so this is somebody who's having physical reactions. You might be having sweaty palms. You might be feeling a little dizzy or feel a little sick to your stomach. This is also, it can be, you're so nervous that you keep rereading and you keep thinking about distracting things like, did I actually lock my door when I left my place? And you keep getting pulled out of the exam. If you're having those kinds of experiences, then most likely it's the case that taking the test at home is going to be better.
That makes sense. How about just general test anxiety? We've certainly had a lot of clients who they do great on the practices and they walk in there and they just don't do particularly well.
Yeah, it is a stressful situation. It's whether you're taking it at home or in the testing center, because you feel like so much rides on these exams. Yeah. So first of all, I tell all of my students, plan to take the official test twice. Yeah. From the start, just build it into your schedule. The GRE and the GMAT have waiting periods before you can take the exam again. It's 16 days for the GMAT and 21 days for the GRE. So just build that into your calendar. The EA has a one-day waiting period. So the EA basically doesn't have a waiting period. But build that into your calendar. Plan to take it twice. The first one is your dry run. You're getting used to the environment, whether that's at home or in the testing center, the security procedures, the showing your ID, if it's, being on camera the entire time, somebody filming you in your own house while you take a test. You're just getting used to that situation. It's a weird situation. Yeah. And when you take it the second time, knowing what's coming will actually help to manage a certain amount, not all of it, but a certain amount of that anxiety. Sure. And sometimes end up getting the score on the first one.
Right. That's right.
Right. So in an ideal
That's
world,
right.
you could use it as your dry run and you get the score. But if you don't, whatever, because you're going to go take it again. And again,
I do think it's important to note, just for anyone who's new to the GMAT, there are no consequences from an admissions perspective of taking the test, 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 times.
The schools won't even know, in fact, now. So they recently changed the way that they report the scores. And so they'll really only send the scores that you tell them to send.
And even if they did know, it's an adaptive test. And so you can't fluke into your highest level performance. The school will assume that your highest level performance is who you actually are.
So that was the point that I was going to make, is basically there's no downside, again, besides the test fee itself and your own time, to taking the test multiple times.
Right. Anything else in our grab bag of questions about, kind of the soft skills that people need to take?
Yeah. How do you study for vocabulary?
Individual question, depending on how people's brains work. For me, the thing that works the best, so first of all, flashcards, you got to have flashcards, but what goes on those flashcards? Right. And it can't just be, here's the definition. Right. I need a sentence that's an example sentence, or at least one example sentence that tells me how does this get used in context. Ideally, I'd like a couple sentences like that are a bit different. And then beyond that, some kind of a mnemonic sentence. Mnemonic is a fancy word for something that helps you remember something. And I'll give you one that I use to remember the word raconteur, which is a word that means like a storyteller, basically.
Jeremy, are you familiar with the word raconteur?
My father is a great raconteur.
Okay.
Yeah,
and the way that I remember that word is that you have a raccoon who's going on tour telling fascinating stories.
There we go.
So you use weird. It could be an image. It could be a little story that you're telling yourself on the word, or a pun on the word itself, whatever, something like that. But you're using little things like that that you really have to devise yourself, because that's what then makes it a good memory that you're going to be able to recall. This is again something where if you just go buy flashcards somebody else has made, or if you make ChatGPT make you flashcards or something, it's not going to work as well if you're making the flashcards yourself.
Right.
That's 50% of the battle right there.
Right. I've always had a real problem, almost philosophically, with vocabulary words, in the sense of, first of all, it is business school, and second of all, what are you actually testing me on? In fact, let me turn that around. Why are they testing me on my vocabulary?
So they've changed the way that they test. The vocabulary is tested on the GRE, not on the GMAT or the EA, except lightly in terms of you need to understand vocabulary to understand the words, the sentences that they're writing. The GRE has changed over the years the way in which it's formulating the vocabulary questions. And so they are much more focused now on essentially like vocab in context, or conveying the meaning of a broader sentence or idea, as opposed to just what's the definition of this word. I think you can still argue, did we really need to get that much into the vocabulary? You could have made the same argument on the GMAT when it still had grammar. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons they removed grammar, because they were like, you know what? Yeah, you really don't need to know it to this level.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, but the GRE, of course, is used for many other programs besides business school. So for some other programs, vocabulary is important. Yeah.
I'm curious to see what happens as more and more people take the new GMAT. Because like if you look at like a Harvard class right now, or a Stanford class, I think you're seeing about 60% GMAT, 40% GRE, something around there. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be turned off by data insights. I feel like looking at that, it's just going to seem daunting, and they're going to move to the GRE. And I don't know. I mean, are you seeing people who, now that it's a mandatory part of the test, which it wasn't before?
There's certainly people who are concerned about it. There's sort of a split there too, because if somebody's coming from one of the more traditional business school paths of consulting, finance, tech, they're used to looking at data. They like the data analytics section because it feels a lot like what they're doing at work every day.
Right.
And so those folks are happy. And then people who aren't working with that kind of stuff and who are more nervous about the data analytics type stuff, yes, they're not thrilled about DI being part of your total score now. And my answer to that is essentially, okay, so you have a choice here. There's not a right answer to this. It really is what you want to do and how you want to use your test studies. If you're nervous about data analytics in general, but you want to go to business school, then you have to think about the fact that when you get to business school, you're going to be doing this every day.
Right.
And so it's going to be wise to take some time to get yourself more comfortable with this kind of material before you get to business school. Now, you could use your GMAT studies to do double duty to help you do that. You could also say, you know what, I hate these tests. I know I have to take a test, but I just want to get through the test itself as easily as I can, in which case I'm going to do the GRE. But if you do that and part of your reason is because you're not thrilled about the DI section on GMAT, do yourself a favor and separately find an online course or something that's going to give you some stats, some data analysis type introduction, because the last thing that you want to do is be paying tens of thousands of dollars and get to business school on the first day and feel like you're drowning.
Well, it's funny you said it, because as you were talking about this, I would have thought, okay, think back to myself as an applicant. I was a speechwriter. I was not in data every day. If I would have had the option, you could only take the GMAT when I was applying, I would have looked at the DI and I would have run for the hills, okay? And I would have taken the GRE for sure. And I would have done it with a bargain that said, like, look, I don't want to be evaluated on this skill. I want to get in and then learn that. But I was also the student who really got my butt kicked by the first couple of months of business school, because I didn't know what a spreadsheet was before I got to business school. But I was basically illiterate in the key language of business school, which is spreadsheet. You're right. You got to be careful. You got to watch what you wish for with this.
And I would say one way or the other, you got to get yourself a good solid foundation before business school starts, or it's going to be really, really rough the first term and really the first year. If you would like to, you can use the GMAT to do double duty in that space. You don't have to. You can do the GRE and then separately do something else that will help you get ready for that aspect of business school.
Okay. So unlike the vocabulary, actually, when it comes to data, the GMAT can really be very helpful in terms of getting you tuned up for business school.
Yeah. So this is the recent changes that they made to the exam, and the reason that they made data insights a part of your total score where it wasn't before. It really was because it's trying to tie much more tightly to the kinds of skills you will actually need. That's also why they dropped the grammar. Do you need to be able to communicate and write good emails and et cetera? Of course you do. You're also going to have, a dictionary and Grammarly and ChatGPT when you're working. We don't need the standardized test to test for those skills. But your analytical reasoning, your ability to comprehend texts and answer questions about them, and your ability to read data, yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense then. So I've never taken a standardized test before. That, I think, is the case for a lot of international students. They come to you on the first day really not even knowing what any of this looks like. How do you advise them?
Yeah, so there are a number of free resources available that people can use to just get themselves up to speed. And if somebody's coming to this, either not having taken a standardized test before, maybe they weren't going to school in North America, or maybe they've been out of school for 10 years.
Right.
And they just, it's been a long time since they've had to sit down and study and read a book and do a problem set. Give yourself, we talked earlier about, plan to spend 3 to 4, maybe 5 months studying. Give yourself an extra month. Take some time. Don't start a course immediately. Go take some time to build some strong foundations. My company, we have basically an entire Foundations of Math Study program that we make available for free.
Okay.
And that we will continue to make available for free because we're putting that out there. We want everyone to basically be able to have a strong foundation. Even if you don't want to go to business school or take these exams, it's a good thing to do. Go do it. So there's a book that's free on ebook that's free on Amazon. There are free live workshops. And you can just get all of this stuff, get up to speed, and also use that as a chance to get yourself back into a study cadence.
Yes.
If it's been a while, getting used to, after dinner or before work, whenever my brain is, at its most awake throughout the day, get myself back into just this habit of studying. And build up that foundation, get the basics, so that if you are going to take a class or do like an on-demand program that has videos, you really feel like you've got a solid base. You can get the most out of those lessons as you're going through the program.
I've learned so much. Seriously, I've learned so. I'm so glad I don't have to take the test now.
Right.
But I've learned so much about how to take this test, and we're not test prep people, but we always defer to Manhattan Prep. But it's good to know the basics of you might be making some macro mistakes that have very little to do with your actual abilities.
Right. And also you have choices here. There are 3 different tests you can take. Yeah. You can take it multiple times. People, again, have test anxiety. There are some ways around that. And at the end of the day, I would feel more comfortable rather than believing that it's a one and done when it comes to some of these tests. That's not the case at all.
Yeah. Did you know that Manhattan Prep, powered by Kaplan, offers you free GMAT, GRE, and EA starter kits? You can use these starter kits to learn the basics about your chosen exam and to plan your course of study. Please go to manhattanprep.com where you can find access to all 3 starter kits. Check it out and use the code MPREP10 to take 10% off any GMAT, GRE, or EA live course or private tutoring. It's good until December 31st, 2025, so take advantage of this great offer before the year is over.
Thank you very much for joining us today for the mbaMission podcast.